Trigger warning. This episode contains a non-graphic tale depicting suicide. Welcome to our weird world, where each week we gather around the bonfire to uncover the world's most fascinating legends and mysteries. Tonight, we bring you the story of the Red Lady of Pratt Hall. So sit back, relax, and let the flames of our virtual campfire guide you through these haunted halls. Huntingdon College, nestled in the heart of Montgomery, Alabama, is known for its rich history, charming architecture, and a legend that has cast a shadow over its halls for nearly a century. The story of the Red Lady of Pratt Hall is one that has been whispered among students, passed down through generations, and told with a mixture of awe and dread. The year was 1910, a time when the world was on the brink of change, yet the South still clung to its traditions. Huntingdon College, a small but prestigious women's school, stood as a bastion of Southern elegance. The campus, with its ivy-covered walls and grand oak trees, seemed like a place where time moved a little slower and the worries of the outside world felt distant. It was during this time that a young woman named Margaret arrived at Huntingdon. Margaret, hailing from a wealthy family in the neighboring state of Georgia, was a striking figure. Tall and slender, with raven black hair that fell in soft waves around her face. She was beautiful in a delicate way. But what truly set her apart more than anything else was her fondness for the color red. Margaret had always been different. While other girls her age reveled in social gatherings and chatted excitedly about the latest fashions, Margaret was often found alone, lost in thought, or absorbed in a book. She had quiet intensity about her, a brooding nature that made her seem older than her years. But it was her wardrobe that drew the most attention. She dressed almost exclusively in red. Rich velvety reds, crimson silks, and ruby-colored lace. His choice of color was unusual and somewhat unsettling, as red was often associated with passion, anger, or even danger. Her parents, concerned about her reclusive nature, hoped that sending her to the Huntingdon College would help her make friends and become more sociable. They believed that the environment of a close-knit women's college could bring her out of her shell and encourage her to form the connections she seemed to lack. Margaret's arrival at Huntingdon was met with curiosity. The other students, many of whom came from similar backgrounds, were intrigued with the mysterious newcomer. But despite their initial interest, Margaret remained aloof. She attended classes, did her work diligently, but kept to herself. She rarely joined the other girls in their evening gatherings or their weekend outings into town. When she did, she often stood apart, observing but not engaging. Her dormitory, Pratt Hall, was a stately building with a grand staircase and long, echoing hallways. It was there, in a small, sparsely furnished room, that Margaret spent most of her time. The other girls soon began to notice that strange things seemed to happen when Margaret was around. Lights would flicker when she walked by, doors would creak open or slam shut without warning, and the air around her seemed to be charged with an unseen energy. As weeks turned into months, Margaret's isolation deepened. The initial attempts by her classmates to include her in their activities gradually waned. They were polite but distant, unsure of how to relate to someone so different from themselves. Whispers began to circulate, stories of Margaret's odd behavior, her strange obsession with the color red, and the unnerving aura that seemed to follow her. Margaret's loneliness grew unbearable. The walls of Pratt Hall, once a place of potential friendship and camaraderie, now felt like a prison. She wandered the campus at night, her red dress glowing faintly in the moonlight, a solitary figure among the shadows. She would often be seen standing by the windows of Pratt Hall, staring out into the darkness, her face a mask of sorrow. One of the few people who seemed to care was a professor of literature, a kind woman in her mid-40s who recognized Margaret's intellectual depth and emotional sensitivity. She tried to reach out to her, offering extra help with assignments, inviting her to tea, and encouraging her to participate in class discussions. For a time, it seemed as though Margaret might be coming out of her shell, but the progress was slow, and the other students remained distant. Margaret began to feel that she was cursed, destined to be alone. She wrote long letters to her parents, describing her despair, but she never sent them. She feared that they would see her as a failure, and they would be disappointed in her inability to fit in. Her feelings of isolation began to take a toll on her mental health. She became increasingly withdrawn, her mood swinging between deep depression and moments of intense, almost manic energy. The red dresses, once a symbol of her individuality, began to take on a darker significance. They became her armor, a way to protect herself from the world that seemed to reject her at every turn. But they also became a prison, a constant reminder of her difference, of the fact that she would never truly belong. As the months dragged on, Margaret's mental state deteriorated even further. She began to experience strange visions and nightmares that left her shaken and terrified. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that someone or something was watching her. The other students noticed the change in her. She grew pale and gaunt, her eyes haunted by an inner torment that she could not escape. She began to speak less and less, retreating further into herself. Her once impeccable appearance became disheveled, her red dresses wrinkled and stained. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the sky turned a deep blood red, Margaret had a particularly disturbing vision. She saw herself standing at the edge of a cliff, dressed in her favorite red gown. Below her, the waves crashed against the rocks, the water dark and menacing. She felt a presence behind her, something cold and malevolent, urging her to jump. She fought against the impulse, but the pull was too strong. She stepped forward, and the ground gave way beneath her. She fell, her screams swallowed by the wind, and then, nothing. When she awoke, she was back in her room, the vision lingering in the dark cloud of her mind. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that something was coming for her, something that would not be denied. In the days that followed, Margaret became obsessed with the idea of death. She began to talk about it with a calm, almost detached curiosity, as though it was a destination she was preparing to reach. She spoke of the afterlife, of what might await her on the other side. The other students, already unnerved by her presence, began to avoid her entirely. They whispered that she was mad, that she was cursed, that the Red Lady was not long for this world. The final straw came on a stormy night in early spring. The rain pounded against the windows of Pratt Hall, and the wind howled through the trees. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The students huddled together in their rooms, the storm outside mirroring the unease they felt within. Margaret, however, was alone in her room, her only company the flickering candles on her desk. She sat at the window, staring out at the rain, her face pale and expressionless. She had not eaten in days, and her hands trembled from exhaustion. The visions had returned, more vivid and terrifying than before. She saw herself walking through the halls of Pratt Hall, her red dress trailing behind her, but the halls were empty and silent as the grave. She felt the presence again, closer this time, almost touching her. In a moment of clarity, Margaret realized what she had to do. She could not go on like this, trapped between two worlds and haunted by shadows. She had to end it, to escape the torment that had consumed her. She took a piece of paper and began to write, her hands steady despite the chaos in her mind. She wrote a letter to her parents, apologizing for her failure, for the pain she had caused them. She told them that she loved them, but she could not continue in this world. She signed the letter, folded it neatly, placed it on her desk. Then she stood up, her red dress swirling around her like a pool of blood. She walked to the door, her steps slow and deliberate as though she were moving through the water. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. The other students, huddled in their rooms, heard the sound of her footsteps echoing through the halls. Some of them peeked out from their doors, their faces pale with fear. They saw Margaret, her red dress glowing in the dim light, and her face a mask of determination. She did not look at them as she passed, her eyes fixed on some distant point. She walked to the end of the hall where the grand staircase spiraled down to the ground floor. She paused for a moment, her hand resting on the banister. Then she began to descend. Her footsteps were slow, almost hesitant, as though she were walking to her own execution. When she reached the bottom, she turned and walked toward the front door. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but she did not falter. She reached the door and pulled it open, the cold night rushing in. For a moment, she stood there, her red dress billowing around her, and then she stepped outside. The storm hit her like a wall of water, drenching her in seconds, but she didn't care. She walked forward, her bare feet sinking into the wet grass, her dress trailing behind her like a river of blood. She walked across the campus, past the silent buildings and the empty pathways. She walked until she reached the edge of the woods where the trees stood tall and dark, their branches swaying in the wind. She entered the woods, the darkness closing in around her. She walked deeper and deeper, with the trees closing in and the air growing colder. She did not stop until she reached a small clearing, a place she had never seen before, but felt as though she had known all her life. In the center of the clearing stood a single ancient oak tree. its branches twisted and gnarled, reaching out like skeletal fingers. She reached the tree, climbing up to its large exposed roots and placing her hand on its rough bark, feeling the life pulsing within it. She knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and then she reached up, pulling a length of red silk from her dress. She tied it around her neck, the fabric cool and wet against her skin. Then she tied the other end to the lowest branch of the tree, her hands steady and her mind clear. Finally, without hesitation, she jumped off the edge of the tree's roots, her body dropping like a stone. The silk tightened around her neck, cutting off her breath, but she did not struggle. She felt a moment of intense pain, and then nothing. The storm raged on, the wind howling through the trees, the rain pounding the earth. But in the clearing, there was silence. Margaret's body swayed gently in the wind, her red dress fluttering like a flag in the darkness. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the campus drenched and eerily quiet. The sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting a pale, ghostly light over the landscape. The students of Pratt Hall woke with a sense of unease, the events of the previous night hanging over them like a shroud. It wasn't long before Margaret's absence was noticed. When she did not appear for breakfast, the other girls exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to voice their fears. It wasn't until a professor came to check on her that the truth was discovered. Margaret's room was as she had left it, the candle burned out and the letter on her desk. The professors read the letter, her hands trembling, and then she knew what had happened. A search party was quickly organized, and it wasn't long before they found her. The sight of Margaret's lifeless body hanging from the oak tree sent shockwaves through the campus. The students, already unnerved by her presence in life, were now terrified by her death. They whispered that the Red Lady had finally succumbed to the madness that had plagued her, that she had been driven to this terrible act by forces beyond their understanding. Pratt Hall was never the same after that. The sense of unease that had always surrounded Margaret seemed to linger in the building, growing stronger with each passing day. Strange things began to happen. Lights would flicker, doors would slam shut, and the temperatures would drop suddenly, even on warm days. The students reported hearing footsteps in the hallways at night, the sound of someone crying, and the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. But the most terrifying phenomenon was the appearance of the Red Lady herself. It started with fleeting glimpses, a figure in a red dress standing at the end of the hallway, a shadow passing by the window, a flash of red in the corner of the eye. At first, the sightings were dismissed as imagination, the result of nerves and fear, but as they became more frequent, it became clear that something was haunting Pratt Hall. Students began to see her more clearly. She would appear at night, walking through the halls of Pratt Hall, her red dress glowing faintly in the darkness. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her expression one of deep sorrow. She did not speak, but her presence was enough to send chills down the spine of anyone who saw her. Some students claimed that she would stand at the foot of their beds, watching them as they slept. Others said they felt a cold hand on their shoulder, only to turn around and find no one there. The sightings grew more intense around the anniversary of her death, with some students reporting that they had seen her standing by the oak tree where she had ended her life, her red dress billowing in the wind. The fear of the Red Lady spread throughout the campus, and it wasn't long before students began to leave Pratt Hall, unable to bear the constant presence of the ghost. The administration, desperate to quell the growing panic, tried to dismiss the sightings as mere superstition, but the stories persisted. Over the years, the legend of the Red Lady of Pratt Hall became part of Huntingdon College history. New students were told the story as a rite of passage, a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and despair. The old oak tree where Margaret had taken her life became a place of pilgrimage, where students would leave flowers or notes in her memory. Despite the fear and sadness surrounding the story, there was also a sense of reverence for Margaret. She became a symbol of the misunderstood, the lonely, and the ones who did not fit in. The Red Lady, once a figure of terror, became a reminder of the importance of kindness, of reaching out to those who might be suffering in silence. Pratt Hall, though still standing, is no longer used as a dormitory. It remains a place of mystery, its halls echoing with the memory of the Red Lady. Some say that her spirit has finally found peace, that she no longer haunts the buildings as she once did, but others claim that on quiet nights, when the moonlight is just right, you can still see her, standing by the window, her red dress glowing faintly, a solitary figure in the darkness. And so, the story of the Red Lady of Pratt Hall lives on, a ghostly tale that continues to haunt the halls of Huntingdon College, a reminder that even in death, the spirit of Margaret, the Red Lady, has not been forgotten. As we leave you here, remember, the legends of our weird world are boundless. If you've enjoyed exploring campus with us, please share, like, and subscribe to our channel for more content. Your support enables us to keep the past alive. Until next time, stay curious and beware the cold hand on your shoulder and the red glint out of the corner of your eye.